Guys, I agree with you, but we're also gonna have an upcoming speaker that goes by the name Colby Fayock, and just a couple of moments. So, to appreciate this time that we are together on the stream, and the Colby Fayock is ready to rock and roll and give you even more energy, even more valuable content. I feel like that at least. But yeah, everyone has its own style, so you can't compare. You can't compare for real. But Colby,
Hey,
welcome,
how's it
sir.
going? Can you hear me?
Fine. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We can hear you.
Awesome.
Well, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm excited, man. I mean, there's
Yeah.
so much things going on right now, and you just need to speed up with pronunciation of speakers. That's what I'm doing right now,
Yeah.
and
It,
also,
it can be
with,
it can be tough.
yeah, with the following of the content that you guys do. That's great.
Yeah.
You
And
ready to roll?
yep, well I might not have the same energy as Joe. I'll bring as much energy as I can.
As I said, everyone has its own style,
Yep.
and everyone finds it for himself. What he
Absolutely.
enjoyed the most.
Cool.
Yeah, but that was nice, and I hope you're gonna blow it up.
I appreciate it.
Appreciate it, sir. I'm
Awesome.
leaving this scene.
All right, thank you. All right. Hey, everybody, stop what you're doing and put down the JavaScript. We're going to talk about how you can level up by learning the fundamentals of web development. So who am I? I'm Colby Fayock. I'm the one hugging BB-8 and Kylo Ren over there. I work on the UX and front-end side of things at LM84. You can find me pretty much anywhere on the web by just Googling my name, as I'm the only one in the world. So we're going to start with a story. Here we have two people at the beginning of their career. On the left, we have Mark. He's a jolly fellow. He likes the color red. And we have Luke, Mark's brother, more of a green kind of guy. Both of our friends are switching careers. They're giving coding a try. So they try to find a boot camp to dive right in. First, we have Mark. Mark found this cool boot camp that promises to make you a JavaScript ninja. Better yet, it only takes 1 month. They make sure to teach you the most popular frameworks available right now. So this will make you super marketable. Then we have Luke. Luke took a little bit different of a route. He found a course that takes a little bit longer, but he'll know how to build a whole website with just HTML and CSS. He'll also learn a little bit of JavaScript, but they didn't promise any specific framework. Both of our friends decide to submit their resumes for a job at One Up Inc. It's a junior front end dev position. The description for both of them is a near perfect fit. Luckily, they both get a callback for a code challenge. Once they get on the call, they find out that their task is to take this mock-up and transform it into a website. They'll have about 45 minutes to do this. After, they'll talk a little bit about their work. Not too bad, right? First up is Mark. This is easy for Mark. He just got out of a boot camp where he learned how to use React, and the job posting says they want React, so that's perfect. So then he'll build a challenge with React. He can also use some CSS and JS. He recently read a little bit about that, and it should be pretty easy to integrate for a quick win. Then we have Luke. He again decides to take a little bit different of a route. The website looks pretty simple, right? So he thinks he can do it with some just plain old HTML, layer on a little CSS, and it should do the trick. So let's compare solutions. So Mark didn't get super far. He only got the title. Luke seemed to get pretty far. It's not perfect, some mismatched colors and sizes, but it's a good start. So what happened with Mark? Let's just say that Mark didn't have a great interview. First, Mark tried to get a React app going. He forgot that he needs to configure a package manager to install React. All right, so moving past that, he thinks he figured it out. He was able to quickly look up an example, and he can add some external scripts to load React. Now he can get moving. But dang, that can't load in the browser that's not native JavaScript. Great. So he figured out that he can include Babel, and with that, he can add the Babel type to the script tag, and now he can use JSX. He's in business. But oh man, we're still getting an error. Let's check the React docs again quick. All right. He needs to wrap it in create element. Awesome. So that should work, and it does. And now we can start getting moving on the website. So Mark adds his header and it renders. We're making progress. But then he realizes he needs to add some styles to make it look right. He can't install it from npm, so he needs to find an external link again. But oh no, by the time he actually found a solution, he ran out of time. He spent so much time debugging that first setup that he never actually had a lot of time to build the site. On the other hand, Luke broke out his favorite text editor, similar to what Mark did, but instead of trying to deal with packages, he just started with some basic HTML. create a header, he knew he was able to throw together a few HTML elements. Use the header and nav tags, nice and semantic. For the content, use the main tag, an image tag, and some text. Figured he can use some CSS to position it all correctly. So he did. He added some styles to make it look right. Flexbox makes this nice and easy to do. So he flexed the header, flexed the body, flexed all the things, and he was good to go. With all that, Luke ended up with a lot more progress than Mark. So of course, Luke lands the job. He had something to talk about in those last 15 minutes. He went over why he chose Flexbox, why he used the header and the nav tags. He talked about what he would have done next to fix some of the styling. On the other hand, Mark was still stuck at the beginning. He didn't have much to talk about. He was stuck fumbling starting the project in the first place with React. And the truth of this story is only slightly exaggerated. I didn't use real names or likeness, but this exact situation happens quite often. Of course, someone super experienced with React might not have hit those same roadblocks, but I've personally sat through interviews watching candidates struggle with these exact same types of challenges. And this situation isn't unique to React. This is pretty much any JavaScript framework, but job seekers come into an interview wanting to impress everyone by using the coolest tools. And I totally don't blame them, but they're really only setting themselves up for failure. So while every company, every candidate, and every interview are each unique, there's a common thread. It's easy to want to learn the new exciting tools and jump right in. And that's not necessarily even a bad thing. Part of why I love what I do is because this stuff is a lot of fun. It's the kind of thing that keeps me inspired. But dealing with an interview is stressful in the first place. And while not every interview is going to wind up like that, we can set ourselves up with a good foundation, which will help us have a better understanding of the tools we're working with. So we're going to talk about how you can level up. We're going to talk about why these things can actually make a difference and learn some cool tricks along the way. So we'll start with HTML. I would imagine most of us have at least actually heard of HTML. So what exactly is it? If you didn't know, it stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It's the essential building block of all websites. And it has been since probably before most of us even heard of HTML. A lot of us probably don't have to write this much by hand anymore, given React and other UI libraries kind of do it for us. But this is kind of the basic skeleton of a web page. We have our doc type, HTML tag, head, and body with a simple H1. We're probably more familiar with this, though. The actual skeleton of our page gets abstracted away. We define our page by only the content. So instead of our HTML in the head, we might only see the H1. The cool thing about React and JSX, though, is we can really write any HTML we want. For the most part, it's going to be valid. This isn't groundbreaking, but this is just setting the tone for some of the points ahead. But ultimately, this JSX gets compiled down to HTML, the same HTML that we can write by hand. We just now have tools that can provide us with a way to generate it more efficiently. So that Gatsby app that you're running, yeah, that's just creating a bunch of HTML. Next, we'll talk a little bit about CSS. A lot of us probably know this as the magic that the web design team makes. I've actually heard backend developers say they're afraid to touch it. So what exactly is CSS? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. We have a simple example here. We're setting the color to red like Mark's outfit. We change the font size and making all the letters uppercase. And bringing this into React, we have a few different options. Personally, I'm still a fan of writing my CSS outside of my JavaScript. I like to supercharge it with Sass, but I know a lot of people like to write their CSS in their JavaScript, and there's a ton of libraries out there to do it. But similar to the HTML we saw before, this all gets compiled down into our basic CSS. Whether it's Sass or CSS and JS, regardless of the type of tool we use, this is ultimately what we get. The only difference is how it's served, whether it's an external link, embedded, or inline. A lot of this might not be new for people, aside from the gasp I heard when I said that I write my CSS outside of my JavaScript. It's important to understand the foundation and how these basic things work. Like, did you know that browsers actually fix your HTML for you? This can be really helpful, especially if you're starting, but it can also be really confusing if you don't understand what's going on. Like here, you can't nest a div inside of a paragraph tag. Particularly, you can't nest another block level element inside of a paragraph. So the browser tries to fix this for us, but this actually messes up our intent. We were expecting that div to be purple, but because the browser fixes it, it pulls that div outside of the paragraph tag, and the paragraph style no longer cascades. For that in CSS, the vertical padding is actually relative to the width. Ignore the jankiness while trying to show an animation here, but we can take advantage of this little quirk. Sometimes our best option when we're building things out is to use a background image. But the tricky thing is with this is we can't scale the width and height easily like we can an actual image. Instead, what we can do is set the height to 0. Then we use the width divided by the height, in percentage form to set a vertical padding. So this way, no matter the width, the height will always keep the correct ratio. So what's the point I'm trying to make with all this? Well, those are handy to know. Those two things alone won't make you a better developer. But what I'm getting at is understanding your tooling from a more fundamental level will help you level up your game. So how can we do that? The first thing we can apply this to is SEO. Many of us have probably heard of this in one form or another, but might not understand what it is. SEO stands for search engine optimization. It can be super complex with keyword research and strategy, but we're going to focus on the stuff we can actually control as developers. So, our ultimate goal with SEO is to present our content in a way that makes it easy for search engines like Google to understand. The most important thing here is the content, but it also includes the tags you present that the metadata you use to make sure it looks right in the search. Most websites have a healthy mix of different ways for people to get to their websites. Some might be ad traffic, others social media, but there's also people trying to look for something in a search engine who could potentially find your site at the top of the list. This helps bring in more traffic, which could help your website and company grow. Like here, aside from free code camp article traffic, my website pulls in the most from organic search. Of course, my modest blog doesn't get the most traffic on the internet, but how you create your pages matter. For example, if your website is a bunch of images with no alt tag or text anywhere, how is Google going to be able to know and understand what your page is about? So, what can we do better? Well, we can try to be a little bit more conscious about the HTML we use when creating websites. More often than not, it doesn't take much effort to use a different and more meaningful tag. One thing you can do is try to maintain a logical page outline for your website. You shouldn't have every one of your titles as an H1. That's not helping anybody. Instead, using H1 through H6 to organize your content, similar to what you would see in a book. What this does is cue search engines to the hierarchy of the website. It's helping to answer what information belongs under what title. We have two examples here of image tags. The top one doesn't have any alt value, but our bottom one has a description of what's happening inside of the image. What do you think is more likely to show up in a Google search? By providing our alt value, we're helping Google understand what that image is. It's adding more content value to the page and ultimately helping us in searches. Somewhat similarly, anchor tags are important for how Google reads your page. It might be easy to tack on a read more link after a paragraph, but when search engines crawl your page, they look at the text of that link and try to find out what the context of that link is. And using the same text everywhere, like read more, isn't really helping. Instead, we can add links to the descriptive parts of the text we already have. We can make it easier for Google to understand them. If you go to your website and click around and you look at the words in the browser, does it say the same thing for each page? The tag that controls this is the title tag, and it's more important for just the browser tab. This is also what controls the text that shows up on Google. Google's getting smarter about adding more context about the pages, but chances are it's not going to consider your links as valuable if every single one of your pages shows up with your blog name instead of what the page is about. All right, so next we'll talk about accessibility. Accessibility is one of the more meaningful points here. A good high level summary of what accessibility is how usable your website or app is for all types of people. This is regardless of any type of disability. So that means, can someone with a seeing disability still use your website? Each of us as developers are responsible for how our creations are being used. The World Health Organization estimates 15% of the world has some sort of disability. That's over 1 billion people. All right, so the whole world isn't going to be using my site, but how about those 2,400 people that visited my site so far this year? Just hypothetically, if 15% of those visits were people with disabilities, that's still over 360 people. That's a lot of people. Imagine websites for businesses like e-commerce that make money from their website, or websites that people need to help them live. Those are real people who can't use your website because nobody paid attention to it. For businesses, that's loss of money. But for people's needs, that's a prescription they're having trouble filling. We should all take responsibility for the work that we create. It's just the right thing to do. So, what can we do to help our friends and neighbors? We can learn about some of the different types of disabilities that people face when using the web. We can try to be conscious about the decisions that we make. Just like SEO, more often than not, it doesn't take much more effort, if at all, to develop with accessibility in mind. So remember our page outline from before? Well, optimizing for SEO by using proper semantic HTML, you're also helping screen readers understand the hierarchy of the content. As a screen reader is moving up and down a page, it's able to jump over some sections that a person might not be interested in. Imagine this is going to be very difficult if every single header is an H1. And remember our image alt example? See a thread here? A lot of times when we write our HTML properly, you're going to end up providing valuable providing value in multiple ways. Here's a screen reader lands on an image, the person will actually be able to hear what the image is showing. It's just another low effort way to help everyone experience our website. Lists are also a practical use of HTML that's used across the web. But far too often, I see code that logically is a list that's not using the HTML list elements. Next time you create a navigation for your app, don't use a bunch of divs. Use the actual HTML list elements. This will help assistive technology actually assist the people that are trying to use it. And they're not much harder to style. Set your list style on your UL to none, and you're practically where you were with a div. Buttons are also another important aspect. While you can get by pretty far with using a div, you have to do a lot more to get it to a place where it becomes usable. And oftentimes, when I see people using a div like that, they don't actually take that into consideration. With a div, you get nothing by default. But with a button, while you typically override some of the styles, you get something that looks like a button. You get a CSS cursor that shows that it's clickable. You get an HTML element that people can use with their keyboard by tapping to it and hitting enter. And did you know that by default, when nested inside of a form, a button will actually submit the form all of it on its own? This is handy for a variety of reasons, like not worrying about having to set up specific event handlers for submitting your form. The point, though, is along with the rest of the HTML I went over, it's really not much more difficult to use. We just need to become more conscious and get in the habit of doing it from the start. And lastly, we'll talk about simplicity. So what do I actually mean by simplicity? We don't always need extravagant solutions to get our code to work the way we want it to. Sometimes there's a simpler way to do what we're struggling to do with JavaScript. This is probably an exaggerated example of the padding top solution. Hopefully I got the math right in there, but it shows the difference on how some CSS can replace all the JavaScript logic. Bonus, at least in this case, it's likely to be more performant and bug-free. Now, there's absolutely some value from learning while doing. If you want to use a bunch of complex tools to build your blog, that's a great low-risk way to learn into the tools. I even encourage it. It's a way to try new things and rapidly learn without worrying about breaking things. I lost count of the amount of times I rebuilt my website before I settled on my current simple one. But from a work perspective, whether for a client or for your company's website, try to think about the solutions in terms of what it will solve. Is that extra JavaScript worth the additional load it will take in the browser? How much time am I really going to save with those extra tools? So what are some things we can do to keep it simple? Well, we don't need to rewrite the HTML spec every time we add a new component. More often than not, the JavaScript you write means more JavaScript you ship, which can impact the performance of your app. Use what we already have. It's also less work. Like here with the data list element, while it's not super fancy like some of the JavaScript solutions, we can create a basic autocomplete feature for an input. And you don't need JavaScript to create a simple loading animation like you might see on some of your favorite websites. Using some CSS, we can use a gradient and an animation to create this effect. It's just a small snippet here. Better yet, having it as a class, we can extend it to any element we want pretty easily. And while sometimes we need to maintain the state of our components, sometimes we don't. If we're only maintaining that state to style, we can use instead the checked attribute on an input to change how it looks. Here, we're simply showing different text depending on if it's checked using pure CSS. And if I asked you before seeing this how you would make the text responsive, how many of you would jump right into JavaScript? Well, we can actually do this quite nicely with some simple CSS. Here, I'm setting the font size of our H1 to 10 viewport width. It might look a little choppy on the slides between saving this out as a GIF and presenting it, but I promise you it's buttery smooth. That way, it scales nice and evenly with our browser. And bonus, if it gets too small or we want to change it in some way, we can set media query breakpoints and keep it all in CSS. And as much as there are some good practical things about the fundamentals, people are also building some awesome things with some simple HTML and CSS. This is important because it helps us remind us how much there is to do with what's already out there. It's important because it helps us keeping us pushing the boundaries of what we can do with native tools. There's massive work already underway with CSS. If you haven't heard of Houdini yet, you definitely should look it up. And this is beyond the tools that we already have. I believe that progress wouldn't be happening if we didn't have developers constantly pushing the tools. So it can be important to have constraints that promote creativity where you least expect it. Like a trend on CodePen to try to come up with some CSS-only solutions. It's not just challenging, it's fun. And it seems like for a while, people were talking about cake all the time and it was breaking the internet. So Adam set up this pen that turns everything into cake. The only JavaScript in the pen is to just simply upload the image. But once it's uploaded, the rest is HTML and CSS to give that effect. When you hover over the image, it splits it open so you can take a piece. Or this pen from Lynn. It's only CSS for a collector's cabinet. I love all the incredible detail put into it, and you can keep looking around and find new things. The lab made a coronavirus game. You're able to fight the pandemic by clicking each virus. There's no JavaScript in here at all. It's all CSS. The lab uses some inputs similar to all the others, but uses CSS loops to create the different animations. This gives us our virus with the ability to interact with it. And I have to include one of my own, right? I have admittedly haven't picked up a code pen in a while. This thing's about 6 years old. But the story goes, I was watching the Alien movie for the first time, and I stopped watching it after the title scene. But that's because I ended up spending the rest of the movie remaking the title screen in CSS. And I still actually have yet to rewatch it. But just to clarify, I know there's JavaScript in there, but that's only to provide a little handy restart button at the bottom. But it was fun and it was challenging, and it might not be practical for every scenario, but I can apply this to other work in my daily job, like micro interactions or delightful animations in the UI. So now that you all are inevitably inspired, how can we get back to the basics and learn some fundamentals? Free Code Camp is a huge community of learners who are trying to teach themselves to code. They have great courses, free of course, that starts with responsive web design. It's a great place to begin if you want to start digging into an actual course. Egghead has a huge library of lessons and courses, some free, some paid with their pro membership, but you can learn everything from accessibility to full-blown apps. All the instructors I've worked with are super smart and really great at helping others learn. YouTube has a ton of great material ready to watch. Free Code Camp even has their own channel with a ton of great content. But there's a ton of individual content creators like me posting amazing stuff every day. Similar to YouTube, Twitch has a ton of great content. It seems like there's another awesome developer starting their own streaming channel every day, like you saw with Joe. You can get a live walkthrough on how to build these things. And bonus, you can hop in a chat and maybe ask a question or two if you're stuck. And CodePen. I feel like CodePen really changed the game when it came to CSS proof of concepts. It's incredible what you can find browsing around. That's not just CSS and HTML. There's a ton of really advanced JavaScript work in there. Best of all, you have the code immediately available to fork and start playing around with. So how are you feeling after that? Like I said, I hope inspired. There's a lot you can do and learn without diving headfirst into JavaScript. And if you take all these things into consideration, you're not only going to be better off as a developer, and not only will you help yourself by avoiding over-engineering solutions, which can typically bring on more stress, but you're also going to help bring more traffic to your projects and help others use them. So while this talk was about fundamentals, if you're looking for more opportunities to learn by doing with React, you can also check out my free ebook called 50 React Projects, 50 projects for React and the static web, which includes 50 project ideas, complete with project briefs, layouts, and resources. I believe that the best way to learn is by doing, and this will help you avoid asking yourself what to build and just get started building. And that's it. If you want more, you can find me anywhere at Colby Fayock. If you want more resources, I write weekly tutorials and I put out videos on YouTube. I'll also send out a link with all the stuff you've seen here today. Thanks, everyone.